Hey everyone, Coach Dave here. A quick note before we dive in today. If you're targeting Leadville, Unbound, or another big scary off-road event this year, I have a couple of coaching spots open at Kaizen Endurance. Every athlete I work with gets a best bike split race plan, so you're not just trained for the event, you're paced for it. Not sure if coaching is right for you? Start with a consultation. Send me a text message, head over to kaizenendurance.coach, or send me a DM on Instagram at Kaizen Endurance to learn more. Now let's get into it. Welcome back to the Training Babble podcast. I'm your host, Dave Shell, and today we are joined again by Uri Carlson from Inner Wild Nutrition. Uri, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to you today because there was a review that came out a couple months ago that I sent to you, and it was they'd looked at 300 or 500 studies and came up with this review and basically saying that we don't need any carbohydrates. And this is something we've talked about on the podcast before, where most athletes, because of the information that's out there, whether it's on Instagram or a podcast or an article, everybody's trying to do as many carbs as possible. And we had talked about before where maybe not every athlete needs to do that. Now, this study, which I'll link to in the show notes, is basically saying, oh, nobody has to do that. Really, you just need 10 grams per hour, which is on the completely opposite side of the spectrum. And so, yeah, I just want to kind of first talk about the history of this, because it's not new. It seems like this thing that just goes back and forth, where it's fat adapted was the buzzword at one point, and then it was carbs, and then it came back to low carb, keto, and stuff like that. And so it just keeps going back and forth. And so let's just start with that. Is what is kind of the history of what the fueling recommendations have been starting in the 2000s, if you know off the top of your head?
I mean, you're exactly right, is that it's been all over the place. And this is what makes me super frustrated for the consumers and for the athletes who are coming to me and saying, there's so much conflicting information out there. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, yeah, fair. I get you. Because there is so much conflicting information out there. And there's been a lot of research that's happening in that world, which is really helpful. Originally it was eating is cheating and we got to go as low carb as possible. And then we swung the other way. And then for a little bit, I think we kind of landed in a happy place. But then something like this comes out and it swings back the other way, which makes it yet again really confusing for folks. Overall, in the pro Peloton, pro tour, that kind of stuff, I don't think that they're back to where it used to be that eating is cheating and you should try to only get, small amounts of carbohydrates, which is great. And it's helpful to look to that. But on the other end of the spectrum, not everyone needs to be consuming 120, 150 grams of carbs per hour. So when we look at the history, I mean, it depends on where you look, because I think consistently it's just been kind of all over the place.
Yeah. I think back, I was at a conference in 2016, and there was a speaker from the Gatorade Sports and Science Institute. I think his name was Matt Pankey. And at that time, and Inigo San Milan was there also, and I think he was talking about the same thing, but it's the research had just come out. They're oh, we just published a paper, and we're now recommending 90 grams of carbs per hour. And so that was 2016. And then from that point on, everybody's just been pushing, oh, if 90 is good, then 100 must be better, and 110 might be better, and 120. And one of the big takeaways from that was that if you're using a single source of carbohydrate like glucose, people could only oxidize up to 60 grams. But if you add a second source, then you can push it up to that. And so people started doing that. And it was regardless of how big they were, how much power output. It's just oh, I should be doing it. And so so there's that side of it, right? Is oh, to improve performance. And then there's the other side of it where it's you talked about fat adapted and eating as little as possible and stuff like that. And so it's funny because up to that point, I don't even know that I recall there being a grams per hour or whatever, but it's just the general recommendation was about 200 calories per hour is what we were trying to do. Like I didn't think about like how many carbs that was or anything. It's just like trying to take 2 gels per hour, just kind
Yeah.
of my goal. But it's become so much more complicated past that, and like so much of it is like, just companies trying to sell us things where it's like, as soon as that came out, like so many brands answered the call with their gels that were glucose, fructose, and like, 2 to 1, or is it 1.8 to 1, or, you know,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I guess let's just back up and like, what are we trying to accomplish with the carbohydrate? Why does it matter for performance?
I mean, it's the primary source of fuel that we use for energy. It's the primary source of fuel for our brain. It's the primary source of fuel for our muscles, right? So we need to make sure that when we are creating this deficit, we're not creating so much of a deficit that it starts to negatively impact performance. And we're going to create some deficit to some degree, but there's a point at which that deficit is going to negatively compromise performance, both physically and mentally, right? So that's what we always need to avoid. The thing is that what you were just mentioning, right? Like everyone aiming for the 90 grams of carbs per hour when that research comes out, or everyone aiming for more and more, is that we have to talk about then what is each person burning and what is the context of the individual that we're speaking to, right? Is it my 62-year-old, perimenopausal, postmenopausal athlete, right? That's going out and she's riding in a group with her lady crew, right? And wants to ride 30, 40 miles and feel good doing it? Or is it my 28-year-old who's training for the Olympics? Because the amount that each one of those people need is very different based on their output, how they metabolize their fuel, what their needs are, what they've set their body up for, how they've trained their gut, their ability to get in, like all of these things. And oftentimes what's missing when we look at this big picture stuff and these recommendations and this research is the context of who actually we are speaking to and who this applies to and to what degree it applies to them or not.
Yeah, I think that's such a big issue just in general, where it's like we look at what the pros are doing, whether we talk about their
Yep.
training plans or what they're eating or what equipment they're using. It's like, oh, if they're using it, then I should be using the same thing. And that's
Exactly.
not always the case. But I think the other thing is like a lot of pros are, like you talked about, Olympian, right? It's like their goal
Mm-hmm.
is to have the absolute best performance on a day. And so it's like they're doing everything they can to achieve that performance. And I think something that kind of gets lost in this is like we lose sight of health, where most athletes, at least like the athletes I work with, it's not just about performance. They also like want to be healthy and want to live longer and all these other things. And so like I feel like that kind of gets lost too, where it's like everything at the expense, like potentially at the expense of health. It's like we don't know what the long-term ramifications are of ingesting 100 grams of carbs per hour all the time, right?
Yeah. And it's also, like what are the most important factors here, right? For the one athlete, it's like, okay, I want to enjoy the food that I'm consuming. I want to support the fact that I'm now in my 60s and I need to support longevity, but I want to go out and eat with my friends and my family and enjoy that. And I have a job that I need to show up for. So I can't eat at any given point throughout the day. I have to fit this into my busy life. And also, I want to be able to show up on the weekends with my friends and ride and not be afraid of bonking the entire time. And then you've got the other athlete who's like, well, it's basically my job to show up and train every single day.
Yeah.
And a part of that is also being intentional with what I eat and when I eat and how I eat. And I have more capacity for that because this is my job and this is my greatest priority. And I'm probably going to be able to and willing to let go a little bit of these other things to make this my number one priority because this is my life right now. And those are two very different people in different scenarios. Like overall, across the board with all of my athletes, the way that I think about this is that exercise is a stress. Exercise can be a bad stress if we're not fueling it adequately, if we're not recovering from it adequately. It can be a good stress that we can adapt to, get faster, get stronger, feel better, have it impact, yes, our performance, but also all other areas of our lives, like our longevity and our health and our well-being, if we fuel it adequately, if we recover from it adequately, if we eat good foods outside of exercise to support exercise, and it becomes this really good stress, which is a wonderful thing because a lot of stresses are not chosen, but exercise is. So if we look at it from that perspective, for each one of those people, we are still aiming to minimize the stress, but we're doing that in slightly different ways because of the context of who they are and the fact that they're very different humans.
Yeah. And I think another thing that kind of gets lost with this is so again, it's like the message goes out that 90 grams or 100 grams per hour is what we should be doing. And so then, like, and like, I'm just thinking about this now. I think like it's like playing telephone, right? Like playing game telephone, where it's like the original message, like it's more nuanced, it's a little bit more complex. But then as it gets passed along, it's like it just becomes like 100 grams per hour all the time. And it's like,
yeah.
But the original message, like when Oscar Euchendrup had put it out there, I think was like, based on duration and intensity and all these things where it's like up to 2 hours, like you probably don't need that much. And like all these things,
Yeah.
right, is like beyond 2.5 hours, then you should think about increasing it and stuff. But it's like the message that got spread was 100 grams per hour, whether you're doing 30 minutes or 5 hours, 100 grams per hour. And so, yeah, I guess my point with that is like, around that same time, or maybe right prior to like 2016, is like there was this idea of like periodized nutrition, or just fueling the work you're doing. So like on bigger days, eat more. On lower days or easier days, eat less, and things like that. And I feel like that's kind of got lost in the shuffle. So do you still advise your athletes around that same thing? Like, does it vary from day to day depending on what you're training for?
100%. Yes. And I was just talking with somebody about this today. That is often what's missing, is that people are giving these macro goals or these calorie goals, but they're not doing the same thing every single day. So what I like to break it down to is, because I get this question all the time, is like, what should my macros be? Or what amount of protein should I be aiming for each day? What amount of carbs should I be aiming for each day? I'm like, well, we have to look at this in per meal and per snack, per eating opportunity throughout the day instead, because I want to make that decision and help you be informed enough to make that decision based on what you've just done and what you're about to do. Because if you're eating breakfast before you're going to go sit on your bike for 4 hours or go do an intensity interval session for 75 minutes, that breakfast and the macros on that plate are going to look very different than if you're about to go and sit at your desk for the next 4 hours. So when we start to break that down into these, I mean, no pun intended, but like these bite-sized scenarios, right? It is so much more actionable and reasonable for the person to figure out and make a decision on, instead of trying to hit some sort of big picture goal that doesn't really look at each given scenario that they find themselves in every single day, and the variability of it. The variability of the fact that you as a coach are not giving somebody the same workout multiple times a week,
Right.
week to week to week. So why would they be eating the same thing every single day?
And so let me ask you about that, because that, like, this is something I've always struggled with, is kind of like, are we eating proactively or are we eating retroactively? And so like thinking about, like you said, like I've got a big workout today, or I'm doing a big ride. So that breakfast and the dinner before, so the previous night before, I might like load up on more carbs, thinking like, I know I'm going to do a lot of work this weekend. And so I want to like have excess carbs. And then like after that, like, should I still, like, I think this is part of it too. It's like just being like confused, where it's like pre, during, and post. Is like, how should that vary when we're thinking about carbs?
I mean, it's not really one or the other. It's kind of both, right? You're thinking about, what did I just do and what am I about to do? And that is helping you make the decision on what am I eating right now in this moment. Because while we can isolate it to like one given scenario, we also have to talk about the fact that we don't restart every single night at midnight, and then we're starting with a blank slate, and what we did the day before doesn't matter.
Right.
So this is all the nuance of it that becomes so valuable and so important. And this is the kind of details and the level of detail that it takes to really truly figure out a nutrition strategy that's going to make sense for you. is, okay, like, let's say that you did a workout, an interval workout that morning, right? Like you wake up, you probably are not going to have a full breakfast because you have an interval workout that's starting in 30, 45 minutes. You're going to have a quick, small pre-workout breakfast, mostly carbohydrates, cut back on the protein and the fat. That's going to be to set you up for that effort. And then you do that effort and then you finish that effort and you have a high carb recovery smoothie shake, something like that. And then you have breakfast, which makes up for the lack of protein, the lack of fiber, the lack of plants, the lack of healthy fat that you didn't have with your first consumption of the day. And you have a more balanced breakfast with, carbohydrates also, but fats and proteins and plants and fiber. So then you go on to the next decision. The next decision is, okay, what do I have going on this afternoon? Do I have nothing and I'm working for the rest of the day? Lunch is going to be pretty standard balanced meal. Snack between lunch and dinner is going to be a pretty standard protein plus carbohydrate snack. Dinner, then you're making your next decision based on when your next workout is. If your next workout is in the morning again, but it's going to be, let's say it's a Saturday and it's a 4-hour effort or something like that, then you're going to increase the carbohydrate a little bit for your dinner. And then you're going to start your next day and probably do a similar thing to what you did with your breakfast, depending on how much time you have before your breakfast. But do you see how it's kind of just like you make the decision in the moment based on what's going on in your world? And then as those decisions add up, that's when they have that cumulative impact.
Well, yes, for sure. And as you talk about that, like a question that comes up for me, or like something I think we should address, is that like you made the point of like somebody working out first thing in the morning, and maybe it's a very intense 1-hour workout on the trainer, which is pretty common.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the other thing that kind of gets lost, right? Like a lot, like, do you need to do 100 grams per hour for that workout? Right.
No.
Theoretically, you should have enough stored glycogen. If you recovered well yesterday and last night, you should have enough stored glycogen. And so it's really just about like a drip, right? To keep your brain happy. And so it's like I guess what I'm trying to get at is like people tend to eat like every workout needs like as much carbohydrate as possible. But the point that paper was trying to make, like really like one of their arguments is that a big part of why we bonk is our brain trying to protect us. So like as blood glucose drops and stuff like that. And so anyway, I guess where I'm trying to get at here is like when you're eating your breakfast, you don't need to have this huge carbohydrate breakfast if you're doing an hour intense workout. It's more about the 3 to 5 hour workout that you're going to do later in the day. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going and doing a quick workout in the morning, an interval workout in the morning, sometimes I'll have my athletes experiment with adding the night before a pre-bedtime post-dinner snack. If they're waking up really early and kind of like getting going right away and they don't have much opportunity to consume much. And I might say, hey, you're probably going to be better off with a little bit of carbohydrate in your bottle, 20 grams of carbohydrate in your bottle for that hour-long effort because you've just been sleeping and fasting for the last 7-8 plus hours, right? As opposed to if they go into that effort in the afternoon, say, 2-3 o'clock after they've had breakfast, snack, lunch, they've loaded up some glycogen stores, they have that on board, they could be good. So it's so much about like the context and the time leading into that. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly there on that example, but does that give you some idea of kind of what?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm not doing a great job of asking the questions either, but I'm like, but that's exactly like, I just think like the importance of like, not every workout has the same fueling needs. And that
Exactly.
we do have, like, again, it's like, it becomes this very black and white thing. It's like, we do have stored glycogen that in theory is enough to get us through like 2 hours of intense exercise. And so a lot of times it's like just about having a little bit of carbohydrate, because I think like there is like the brain effect on that, but like you don't need to be doing max carbs all the time. And so, and like the other side of this, which we've talked about before, is like the fasted rides. And I'm afraid that athletes will be like, oh, okay, so then I need to go into these rides fasted and not do anything but water. And like
Yeah.
that's not what you're arguing either, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times we're kind of right on this brink for these types of efforts that we're talking about, right? It's like the general way that I look at this and talk about this with my athletes is for any effort over 60 to 90 minutes, you need to start adding fuel during carbohydrates during.
Okay.
60 to 90 minutes is a range. So if we're talking 90 minutes intensity, absolutely. If we're talking 60 minutes at zone 1, zone 2 effort, just to go out there and, kind of just do a recovery pace effort, you're probably good to go. But if you're doing 60 minutes and an interval workout, I bet you that adding not 100 grams of carbohydrates, but maybe 20 grams of carbohydrates in the final interval of that effort, 60, 75-minute workout, you're going to feel better than if you didn't consume anything. And then it's also, well, okay, when are you doing this workout? Do you have some fuel on board, or are you coming into it and you've had a cup of coffee and a small bar or a banana or something like that? Because that will also dictate how you feel during. And yeah, all of our workouts are not exactly 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, right? If you've got a 90-minute effort, you're probably going to be better off with a little bit of something, but in that final 45 minutes, the second 45 minutes. But does it have to be 100 grams of carbohydrates? No. Would 20, 25 grams carbohydrates help? Probably.
Yeah. So another thing that kind of gets lost in here, or I guess not lost, but the thing I always tell athletes is like, just because you should or just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And so it's like this whole idea of like gut training, which is like, it is something where like you do need to train your gut to do it, right? And so people start pushing 100 grams like all the time, and they can get to a point where they can
Yeah.
train their gut. But just because you've trained your gut doesn't necessarily mean you're oxidizing all those carbs that you're ingesting. Is that accurate?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just because you've trained your gut to tolerate it, does the work require it? Is really what it comes down to, right? Are you putting out that much power that you need to be consuming that many grams of carbohydrates per hour? And at what point is more not necessarily better, is what the conversation becomes.
Yeah, right, and that's how you guess where we're kind of going with this is like, so how do
Mm-hmm.
people make those decisions? And I think like here's your opportunity for a hot take. This can be the clip. Like,
Mm-hmm.
out of all the athletes you work with, what percentage do you think need to be doing 100 grams per hour?
A small percentage. A small percentage. And one of the ways that I help folks figure this out is, first off, I want to know what they're currently doing, what they've been doing, and how they've been feeling with that. And then what types of efforts are they doing? Like, hey, let's look at the types of efforts you're doing, and what are your goals moving forward, and how have you been feeling, and how are you feeling after you get done with a workout? And if you have to do another workout the next day, how are you feeling? Right? So there's all of those answers help inform me to then get an idea of, all right, well, you're here and maybe we want you to be here, or maybe we want you to be here. And let's test that out and be very intentional when we test that out. And we're going to figure out with all of these variables, like, okay, well, how did that workout feel? How was your power? How was your RPE? How did you feel after the effort? How did your gut tolerate that? What was your, flavor fatigue like, or lack of flavor fatigue like? What was the execution of that like? Was it realistic for you? All of those factors need to help us decide what's going to be best for that athlete. And also, sometimes for folks, like, I'll have them test more and they'll get a good idea of like, ooh, that's my max. Like, that's not going to help me any more than 80 grams is not going to help me any more than 60 grams, for example,
Right.
because it leads to more problems than benefit at some point or another. And it's not just one piece of data that's going to tell us that. It's multiple pieces of data that's going to tell us that. Subjective and objective data.
So what are some of the signs, like what are some of the signs you see that somebody is under fueling? I know you
Mm,
just talked about power and RPE and things like that, but like, are there just like
yeah.
telltale signs where it's like, oh, maybe they performed okay in their workout, but then later in the day or the next day, they're not recovering as quickly or things like that?
Yeah. A lot of times like cravings that catch up to them later in the evening, wanting to like snack or, some people just kind of like be like, I just tend to binge on food and calories and carbohydrates in the evening when I get done with my day and I'm kind of just hanging around and I can't really like rely on the willpower that for some reason I have throughout the day earlier on the day. Just feeling wrecked after every single workout or the next day it overflows and they're like, I can't do like back to back hard efforts or I get done with an effort and then it's the quintessential, like if I have a long effort this weekend, I'm not doing anything else for the rest of the day. I'm not doing house chores. I'm not playing with my kids. Like I have to choose one or the other. And that's a very common kind of, would you call it, result or just if that's happening, like you're missing out on something. That's not how you should be feeling. You shouldn't have to choose between one or the other. And then plateauing or not seeing your power numbers increase or, the PRs and that kind of stuff is a big thing. FTP increasing. We're looking at that as well. And if that's just kind of staying stagnant, then we're looking at, all right, well, especially if you're working with a coach, but you're still not seeing those numbers improve, then if we're not paying attention to your nutrition, you've got this massive opportunity right here in front of you.
Yeah. Another thing I've seen with the 100 grams or 90 grams, whatever, is like a lot of times they'll work in training and it'll work up to a certain point. And you said something too with like flavor fatigue, but then also like what I found is like things will work in training, but then all of a sudden you get to a race and you're going a little bit harder, you're going a little bit longer, and then all of a sudden you're like nauseous, things aren't digesting. And like, is that a sign of like overfueling when you get to
It
that
can,
point?
well, there's also nerves that are sometimes associated with that is like, you have like these like race day nerves and that can show up for a lot of people in their gut, which makes it hard for their gut to tolerate sometimes what they've been able to tolerate in training. So there's that, like the mental connection there that can have an impact. There's also this place that's really challenging to get out of if you find yourself underfueled in a race because you're just in it in the moment for the first, couple hours. And then suddenly you're like, oh man, I gotta keep up with my fueling plan. But if you're already in a hole there, it's really hard to pull yourself out. And so you can get into this place where you are nauseous because you're underfueled. And then you're nauseous and you're not able to fuel enough. And then you're just in this cycle where you're stuck.
Yeah.
So that's really challenging as well.
Okay. So let's take a step back. You kind of mentioned that like when you're working with people, you test this and you test it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So where would you like somebody, like what would you want their baseline to be? Like where should they start testing for grams per
Testing
hour?
for
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 grams per
grams
hour
per
for their
hour.
workout. Yeah.
Well, first off, I'm going to figure out where they're at right now. And if they don't have any consistent strategy for hourly carb goals, I'm going to have them just track and get an idea with them of how much they are at right now and make sure that that's good in terms of literally logistically getting that in, right? Like taking their hands off the handlebars,
Yes.
unpacking it, putting it in their mouth and consuming it, but also hitting that number on a consistent basis. I don't care what that number is. I care that we define their baseline to figure out what they're currently doing. And then, I mean, at this point, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of athletes. So I can look at a person pretty easily based on all the factors that make them, what their goals are, what their current training is, their training peaks, like their all the power numbers, like all that kind of stuff, and get an idea of kind of where they might end up. Of like, are they going to be on the lower end of carbohydrates, age, right? Fitness level, all that, their body size, everything. Are they going to be on the lower end where they're probably going to be pretty good with 40 to 50 grams carbs per hour? Are they going to be in the mid range or are they going to be up in the 90s, 100s, 120s, that kind of thing? And we can make a more informed decision for where they want to end up. But we have to start with their baseline. And then we're building and we're adding an additional like 10 grams of carbs for their next week of efforts. See how that feels. Come back to me. How did that go logistically? Literally getting it in. Again, how did that feel in your gut? How did you feel after your workout? How did you feel during your workout? Were you able to push a little bit harder? All those kind of details. And then we can add a little bit more, and we can add a little bit more as we go. I work with people for 10 to 12 weeks on average. And so we have time to test this stuff out, and that can become really important. And we communicate really consistently, like multiple times per week as they're testing this out, coming back to us, letting us know what's working, what's not working. And it's really cool when we start to lay this all out for people, because a lot of people, they're just like, wow, I've never had the opportunity to look at all these variables that aren't just this number of, I should be aiming for 90 grams of carbs per hour,
Right.
but I don't even know how to do that, you know?
Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking of. Like, as you mentioned it a couple of times as you're talking about, is logistically. And I
Yeah.
think like that can be a challenge, right? And it's like I've seen
Mm-hmm.
people come up with, like, I think about my first 70.3. And I like had this really complicated nutrition plan, and I was like I'll do a quarter of a Cliff Bar. Like all these things, and I was fine on the
Yes.
bike. Like everything was great on the bike. I
Yep.
hopped off to run, and my stomach just shut down. And like, so then I wasn't eating, and then I like bonked so hard, like I tunnel vision, like barely made it the last mile of the
Mm,
run, and it was just like, but it's like I'm curious, like how do you make those micro increments, right? Where it's like you're adding 10 more grams, because that's the other challenge. And I think like I've run into people that they're like, oh, I want to eat real food. It's like, okay, like how many bananas can you stuff in your pockets,
yeah.
And then what does that do to your stomach over
Yep.
6 hours? And so how are you making those changes, and how do you like work on the logistics? Because that's a very real issue as well.
Yeah. It's a very real issue. And that's one of the reasons why I want all of my athletes to have at least two, if not three, different combinations of liquid and solid and semi solid calories, carbohydrates, to get them to what their carb goal is. So if someone has a goal of 60 grams of carbs per hour, we might get 30 from what's in their bottle and 30 from a gel. We might get 30 from what's in their bottle and 30 from some more chewable food. We might get 20 in their bottle and 20 from some gummies, and then 20 from something that's more solid, like a cookie or a baked good or a gel. So I want to have as many different combinations as possible to allow that person to, if plan A doesn't happen, right, like your experience, they have a plan B that they also know works. Because I don't know about you and anyone listening here, but plan Bs are most of the time like a pretty nice thing to have, instead of just having a plan A and then being like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do if this doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So it's a combination typically of like a ratio of what are we doing for liquid calories? What are we doing for solid calories? And then I say, like, liquid is liquid in your bottle, right? Solid is like chewable food, like a rice cake or a cookie bar or a Cliff Bar or any kind of like chewable food. And then the kind of in between is like the gummies and this is one way to break it down. You don't have to do it this way, but that's how I think about it. And the kind of in between is like the gels and the gummies, the sports nutrition products, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so as you're talking about it, like more questions come up always. I'm curious if you give different recommendations for, like, let's use a gravel race as an example, right? And so let's say that it might be 6 to 7 hours, but a lot of times those start out pretty hard. So that first hour,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, it's pretty intense, heart rate's high, like nerves are high, like all these things. But then over time, pace settles down, heart rate comes down, and stuff like that. So would you
Yeah.
ever suggest, like in the beginning, like doing simpler things, and then like as the pace comes down and you can stomach more solid foods, transitioning to that, or how would you approach that?
Again, logistics, right? Like all of these factors matter. So, yeah, it could be that, we're looking at the elevation profile. We're looking at what's the intensity of the effort, because at different intensities, your body can tolerate different types of fuel. At higher intensities, simple, pure, quick carbohydrates are going to be preferred. At lower intensities, you have a little bit more wiggle room to have more of that chewable food, or maybe some savory food to just kind of give your palate cleanser opportunity, that kind of thing. So yeah, we're absolutely looking at that. Typically, when we get into these longer events anything like over 4 to 5 hours, we're not necessarily doing the same exact thing every single hour. Number one, because we don't necessarily have to, because like you said, we're not going to be at the same intensity, the same output, the same terrain every single hour and hour and hour as we get into these longer events. But also that can help us dictate what our needs are and what our opportunities are, you know?
Yeah. And so what are some of the things that maybe I haven't thought of yet? Like what are some of the other tips that you have for athletes to consider as they're thinking about how many carbs they should try to take?
Yeah. I think it's really important for them to think about like, what is my skill set in terms of fueling? Right. And what are my fueling options? I've got like, I can put calories in my bottle, or I can have calories just from gels and gummies and sports nutrition products and bars and stuff. Do I want my bottle to consume calories, or do I just want my bottle to consume fluid and electrolytes? So that's a decision to make. And then that decision is often driven by the fact that, okay, like how comfortable am I with taking my hands off the handlebars and actually consuming that? Right.
Right.
And then how comfortable am I, and what is my skill set in terms of like reaching into my pocket and accessing the fuel and all that kind of stuff as well. So that can drive the decision as well. And then it's, what am I doing right now? And what can I build on to test out? Like a lot of times, the more we test this kind of stuff out, add an additional 10, people will get to the point where they have a limiting factor, whether it's that they just can't logistically get in more fuel, or, okay, we have to actually get in more fuel because you have to practice fueling as a skill, because it is a skill. And we have to add more because I don't think you're feeling as good as you should be feeling right now. Right.
Yeah.
Like you have not reached your max capacity in terms of output and results and speed and how you feel. So that's all information that we gather together. To give you an example of this, I mentioned earlier, this postmenopausal 62-year-old athlete, right? Who's like starting with me, and like, I'm like constantly worried if I'm going to bonk. I'm going on rides with my friend's crew, and we're training for these events like Unbound and Steamboat Gravel, but I'm constantly like in the back of the pack. We start to figure out, okay, what is your baseline hourly fueling strategy? All right, let's push it up a little bit. Let's push it up a little bit, push it up a little bit. This person is like, I had no idea that I could feel this much better. Most people don't,
Right.
they've been doing it for so long and just kind of dragging through it that they have no idea how much better it should feel. But now this person is finishing in the front of her friend's crew every single ride. And she's like, my legs, yeah, they're tired, but they're not like, it's not hard to turn them over anymore. And if I needed to keep going, I could. And I'm like, great. Now we have that context. Now you know how good you should feel. You're seeing improvements. You're looking back at like when you started cycling 6 years ago, you're getting PRs based on that when you were like a new cyclist, right? And you're starting to see beyond that PRs, PRs, PRs. So when we get to that as your baseline, then we have a lot more clarity on where you want to end up and what your ideal numbers are.
So walk me through that a little bit. Like where was she at when she was like like being at the back of the group and stuff like that? And then like what changes did you make
Yeah.
where she started feel like where did she really start to feel different and start to see that
Yeah.
performance increase?
There was not enough consistency in terms of what she was executing on an hourly basis. It was kind of just like, oh, like if the opportunity presents itself, like I'll fuel a little bit, right? Or like there wasn't enough intention behind it. So we started with, all right, let's do like 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Start with something
Yeah.
and build up. And now we're at 50. But it hasn't only been on the bike. It's also been, what are we doing before we get on the bike? What are we doing with the fact that you've got this special timing where you can't actually eat for the first 30 to 45 minutes after you wake up, but you are oftentimes waking up, getting ready, and then rolling out your door to go and ride. Right.
Right.
So like there's some unique situations that come into play there. And how do we set you up for that? Like this was a person where we're like, all right, well, let's optimize the pre-bedtime post dinner snack. so that you're not in as great of a deficit as you used to be when you wake up and you head out the door for your early morning ride. And then how do we recover so that you set your legs up to go and do it again the next day if you want to? So it's not just about what we're doing for carbohydrates per hour on the bike. Yes, that's been a huge factor and a component of it. And her just getting used to executing that, testing out different products, different combinations of solid, semi-solid, liquid calories, all that kind of stuff has been a part of it. But it's also been looking at this bigger picture of the lifestyle nutrition leading up to that. And then after that, recovering from that effort to thus also set you up for the next effort. That's all been our opportunities to set this person up where they're like, whoa, okay, this is a nice baseline to be operating from.
Yeah. And I think I just want to go back to something you said, which I think is so important, is eating with intention, fueling with intention. And I think that's a pretty common thing where it is kind of just like haphazard. A lot of times people have a bunch of crap stuffed in their pockets and they wait until the group stops and then they'll like stop to eat rather than like eating on a schedule or being intentional. And so, I think that's such a good point to have there. So what are some of your other tips for athletes to start to get a handle on this and to really like what would you tell them to look at today? Like what would they evaluate? And then what small changes should they think about making moving forward besides working with you?
I think the first thing is to figure out what they're currently doing. And if they don't have a consistent in the grams of carbs per hour strategy, kind of take like what they're doing without thinking about it much and define what that is. There's no right or wrong there. If it's 10 grams an hour, you definitely need to up it because we could go back to that research paper. But like, what I will say to that research paper is go out there and test 10 grams an hour and then go and test 30 grams an hour. And you will probably pretty accurate be able to like tell that you're not going to be able to get away with 10 grams of carbohydrates per hour. That is not ideal.
For reference, what would 10 grams per hour, like give us an idea of like what that would look like, that you're eating?
I mean, for example, 1 scoop of Scratch Labs hydration is 20 grams of carbohydrates.
Right. So it's half a scoop of that per bottle.
Half a scoop, 40 calories per hour.
Right. Yeah.
Like the research can say anything that it wants to say, but go out there and test it out and see how you feel, because how you feel is more important than what the research says is right or wrong.
Yeah.
So, sorry, side note there.
Yeah.
But figure out where you're at. Are you at 10? Are you at 20? Are you at 30? Are you at 70? Just define where you're at right now for everyone. And then from there, start to test out a little more. And if you're way up high, right? If you're like just trying to cram in 100 without knowing that that's right for you, maybe decrease a little bit. And you might realize that, oh, actually, I feel much better. My gut feels much better. It's easier to execute on, and it's not making a big performance difference if I have 80 grams of carbs per hour. So there's that for the people that are over fueling. But for the likely majority that are under fueling, define where you're at and then add in an additional 10 grams of carbs every week and see how you feel with that. And also, to make this really easy, I think it's really helpful for people to be able to make decisions ahead of time before they get on the bike in the moment on how they're going to meet that 50 grams, 690, whatever it is. So literally take on your kitchen table, what does this look like for this hour versus this hour versus this hour? So you can visualize in your head, what's the stack of fuel that I'm going to need for this amount of carbs per hour, hour 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that you've already visualized that in your head and made that conscious decision before you get on the bike. I'm doing this a lot with my ultra cyclists who are out there for, one big, huge, long day or multiple days on end. So they don't have to think about it. And the more that you do that, the more you can be like, oh, okay, like this is going to be about 50 grams of carbs per hour. And it's actually pretty surprising that it's not often a massive amount.
Well, and one thing I want to go back to when you said like the people that are doing 90 or whatever, it's like not only like there is the performance improvement, right? Like there is diminishing
Mm-hmm.
returns, and it's like you said, like back it off to 80. Is there a performance decrement? If not, like back it off to
Yeah.
70. But also
Yep.
just the cost of having to
Yeah.
like to pay for that many carbs. Like if you're doing 100 grams per hour for every session, like it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're doing Martins, like it's like $2 a packet. That's crazy.
Yep.
So like you save a
Totally.
lot of money, like just by like backing off a little bit,
And that's why sometimes I'm working with people who, like want to get in more of it's not necessarily real food, but like not sports nutrition products, is
Yeah,
figuring out, yes, for my ultra cyclists, because they can't resupply with Martin at every gas station, but also just for the sake of, like what's going to be more cost effective when I'm having to consume so many carbs hour
right.
after hour after hour.
Yeah. And so just going back to like you're talking about laying it out on the table and kind of
Yeah.
visualizing it. And I think that's the other thing, right? Is that what is it like Mike Tyson? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth or something like that. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
you get out there, and after like 3 or 4 hours, you're kind of getting stupid, and your brain's not working, and like
Yeah.
math is hard and things like that. And so like, how do you
Mm-hmm.
simplify that for people so that they're not having to think about it? Like you said, part of it is just like doing it beforehand and having it laid on the table.
Mm-hmm.
But like, do you give them cues like, when they're out there, just like eating this often or drinking this often?
Yeah. I just had an athlete who did a randoneering event for 1,000K over 3 days in Texas. And what she did beforehand is she put each little hour that she was going to do in a baggie. Like, so
Oh, perfect.
she only had to do that. She didn't even have to do that for the full 3 days. But once she had done that I think she did it for like the first 1.5, 2 days, then she was like, oh, I've done that enough that now I kind of know what I'm looking for per hour. And I
Right.
can do it more off of feel versus off of looking at this little baggie. But the little baggies could be a really helpful way for people to get a really good context of like what that feels like to consume that amount and what that actually looks like. And then, yes, I would much rather people consume their fluid and their calories in 10, 15, 20-minute increments throughout every single hour than 30 minutes and absolutely at the top of every hour. Because number one, that's a lot of food to consume in at the top of every single hour,
Right.
let alone like every 30 minutes. It's just more logistics to consume like a full bar plus, like a handful of whatever gummies it is, plus half of your bottle, as opposed to taking a swig here and a bite here and that kind of thing. It also sets you up for failure. The inevitable opportunity where you are going to miss out on a fueling opportunity or a hydration opportunity because you're dealing with whatever it is, right? Like you're in a pack and you can't take your hands off the
Yeah.
handlebars, or you're on something technical and your timer's going off and you're like, oh, wait, I got to skip that one. And then I forgot about it. And then my next 10-minute timer is going off. If you miss one of those opportunities, maybe two of those opportunities, you still have enough opportunities throughout the hour, as opposed to if you missed a 30-minute opportunity, your opportunities go from 2 to 1 pretty quickly.
Yeah. It like as you're describing that, I like doing gravel races. I like to have my map up, and I learned after a few of them that like how quickly an hour flies by. And you're not like
Yeah.
if you're looking at the map and you're not realizing it, and all of a sudden you click over, you're like, oh shit, I haven't eaten in like
Yeah.
2 hours. And so
Right.
so yeah, just eating more frequently, like you said, like being opportunistic, I think, with it. Like if you know mountain biking, you're on a climb and you're going to be descending for the next 20 minutes, like eat, even if
Yep.
it's not time to eat yet.
Yes. And I don't know about you, but I can now tell, okay, if I'm on my bike and I'm coming up on something and I'm going a certain speed, I can kind of look ahead and be like, am I going to be able to get my bottle in and out quickly enough? Right. Like the more you pay attention to this, like I've said, the act of fueling is a skill.
Yeah.
And if we don't practice that act of fueling and get more intentional with it, then it's going to be as hard as it needs to be, which is hard. And it can be easier, but we need to actually practice it and have that awareness to like, oh, like, well, how many feet ahead do I need to actually take my bottle out and put it back in? Am I going to be good before right, whatever it is, get into this rock garden or this technical bit or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you just said like the practice it, because I like it is a skill, and I can't like
Hmm.
it's I can think of several people I've worked with where it's like one of the limiters is they're having to stop to eat.
Yeah.
And it's like, man,
Yeah.
if you could just like eat while you're riding, you just save
Hmm.
10 minutes. Like like
Yep.
that's free speed, you know? But
Hmm.
like in addition to that, I also think how often it is people don't do in training what they're doing in racing. Like they'll have one
Yeah.
fueling plan for when they're out riding, which is maybe not really a fueling plan, but then they get into a race and they're trying to do the 90 grams or 100 grams or whatever, and run
Yeah.
into issues. And so just super important to like train how you race and race how you train, I think.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Last question I have for you is going back to what we originally started talking about here, just like the amount of grams of carbs per hour. Some of the things we take into consideration is like body size, also power output.
Hmm.
Have you seen differences? I mean, aside from just like size differences between men and women, like I've heard in the past, like sometimes females can struggle with like fructose. Like I don't know if that is still true or if that
Mm.
was just a thought like a few years ago. But like, have you seen
Yeah.
differences aside from body size between male and females as in terms of how many carbs they can oxidize or ingest?
I haven't seen anything specific to like fructose versus glucose versus anything else. What I do know, speaking about that 62-year-old athlete that I have right now, right? Like there's different stages in a lifespan where you are
Right.
going to become more sensitive to carbohydrates, which means that you can have the same desired output or result from a lower amount of carbohydrates, which you just become more sensitive to it. So that's something that I'm paying attention to with my athletes based on their age, male and female,
Yeah.
but even more specifically, female, like perimenopausal, postmenopausal female athletes, is that they can oftentimes get away with less carbohydrates and have the same result. And then their protein needs may increase a little bit as well. So, like the standard, 4 parts carbohydrate, 1 part protein ratio for recovery after any effort over 60 to 90 minutes becomes all right, let's decrease the carbohydrate, decrease the carbohydrate a little bit, increase the protein a little bit. But then also, I mean, it's not just that isolated scenario. It's about everything that they're consuming and how they're consuming carbs with protein throughout the days and that kind of thing. And this shows up for some of my masters athletes as well.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep.
Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram. That's where I share a lot of my information is Uri _Carlson _nutrition. If you just type in Uri underscore, there's not many Uris on Instagram, so
I'll
you're
link
probably
to
going
it
to
in the
find
show
me.
notes too. Yeah.
Yeah. That, and then I think I just want people to know that I do offer free discovery calls. And it's an opportunity for me to get on a call with you and hear about what you've got going on and make sure that I'm confident I can help you. And that comes from making sure that I'm confident I can help you with your nutrition, but also making sure that you're ready, that like that this is important to you and that you're in a ready state of change and now is a good time and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I get into on those discovery calls is making sure that I can stand in front of somebody and say, hey, I'm 100% confident I can help you. And we're going to get you to where you want to be. And we're not going to be able to do that with a quick, like, hey, just apply for a call here and then, like, welcome to my program.
Yeah.
We've got to make sure that this is the right fit for me and for you to make sure that it's a win win scenario because we do work together for 10 to 12 weeks. And I'm going to get to know you really well. And you're going to be communicating with me a lot. And that touch point opportunity for multiple touch points and a lot of communication is where I see a lot of like the gaps being filled in is folks come to me and they're just like, well, I worked with like a dietitian that was covered by my insurance, for example, right?
Hmm.
And like I met with them 1 week and then I had 3 weeks to do my stuff. And then I met with them 3 weeks later and there was no communication in between. And I'm like, well, you're only going to accomplish so much if that happens. So, yeah, it's not for everyone, but for the people that it is for, we want to make sure it's for them and that it's a good fit. And that's why I offer those calls.
Yeah. And so as you're talking, like, I think a question that might pop up, or like somebody might be listening to this and being like, well, I'm only doing like an hour event. or a 90-minute event, I don't like, this doesn't apply to me. What would you say to those people?
I mean, the hour, 90-minute events, it's really not about what you do during the event. It's about everything that you do leading up to the event and your baseline nutrition outside of that and your training going into that and how we're supporting your training going into that and all those kind of details, because you've got 1, 2 fueling opportunities in an event like that, but everything building up to that is hundreds of fueling opportunities.
Love it. Awesome. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with before I let you go?
I think what you brought up, Dave, about like the intentional eating. So the shift that needs to happen overall is people need to go from reactively eating, where it's just kind of like the second thought that like inserts into their day at any convenient point, or when they get to this threshold where suddenly it's been 6 hours since they've last eaten and they're like, oh my gosh, shoot, I got to eat.
Yeah.
The shift from that to eating intentionally based on what you've just done and what you're about to do, like that's where the magic happens. It doesn't need to be rocket science. It doesn't need to be eating a bunch of foods that you've never eaten before. It doesn't need to be like a bunch of fancy supplements. It just needs to be getting intentional and being consistent about it. And that truly, again, like that's where nutrition becomes a superpower.
Awesome. I love it. Great parting words. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Coach Dave here again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Training Babble podcast. If you're enjoying it, please head over and leave a review or a rating and share it with other people, as it certainly helps us out. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.